My father always said that I was the reason that we left Pakistan to come to North America. Like some people come here for a better life and everything. My family, we were actually more wealthy in Pakistan. My father was a really unusual kind of a person. He was kind of like a voyager, an explorer of his own kind. And I was born in 1962 in Pakistan, in Lahore. And I was born in my grandfather's house. And my grandfather was not one of those people who cares about education. He said, well, why do you need that? You can just go out and work, make money. So when my father was in grade 10, he had to leave school and he had to go out and become an apprentice as a tool and die maker. So he was skilled labor. He was a tool and die maker. And then he married my mom very young. They were both really young when they got married. And in that time in Pakistan, like in many places, they didn't want girl children, they wanted boys. So the rest of the family was quite disappointed when my older sister was born. But my father wasn't. He called her Bushra, which means the good news. And then I came along, another girl, and again there was disappointment. Now at this point, my grandfather, he sent my father to work in England because the money was better. So my father was working in England, sending the money back to take care of my mother, my older sister, and me. We were all living in one room in my grandfather's house. And what happened was when I was 6 months old, I got really sick. I got pneumonia. I had pneumonia in both of my lungs. And in fact, I had such a high fever that some of my teeth, to this day, some of my teeth are a little bit damaged because of the high fever. They were forming in my jawline at that time. And my mother told me about the night that I almost died. She said that she was only 19 when I was born. And there was nothing she could do. She couldn't influence my grandfather to take me to the hospital. He would not send me because I was a girl. And all night, she thought I was going to die that night. I was really sick. I was working very hard to breathe. The sound of my breathing filled the whole room. And she just sat there with me on the bed, watching my chest rise and fall with the effort that I was making to breathe. And all night long, she waited for the sound to stop. Now, the next day, my uncle, he saw me sick like that. So he stole the money from my grandfather. And they took me to the hospital and I was saved. When my father came home to visit and he found out what had happened, he decided there wasn't much he could do to change the environment, like his family and everything like that. And he had seen a new way of doing things. He had seen a new society. So what he did was he took his wife and his two kids, me and my older sister. We left Pakistan and eventually we made our way to Canada. Now, when we arrived in Canada, it was 1965. And my father, he was a skilled laborer, he was a tool and die maker, so he got a job quite easily. And back then, he was making $7 an hour. Now, that doesn't sound like much now, but back then, that was good money. Within a year of buying the house in the little town that I grew up in a small town called Dundas. Within a year of buying that house, my little brother and sister, by this time, they were born, and now there were 4 children in the house. There was my dad, my mom, and there were 4 kids. And my father, at this point, he lost his job. He got laid off. Now, we could have gone on welfare. We probably would have made more money if we had. But my father refused. He had a lot of pride. I mean, there's nothing wrong with welfare, but he said, no, why would I take charity? When I have 2 strong hands, I can work. So he went out and he got another job. Only this time, it was only for $2.35 an hour. Even back then, that was not enough money to support a family of 6 people. After my parents paid their bills, the mortgage, the electricity, and all that kind of stuff, there was only $5 a week left over with which to buy food for 6 people. I grew up extremely poor. And I grew up poor in a richer area because Dundas, where I grew up, is like the outskirts of Hamilton, and it was actually kind of a more of a posh area. So growing up poor in a poor area has some difficulties, but growing up poor in a rich area is even harder. And sometimes those kinds of challenges can actually bring out the best in you. If you can survive them and you can figure out where you belong in your life, then those challenges can actually form you into something different, something better. And I was really fortunate because I had some really good teachers. Now at the time, it was very difficult because we were the only Pakistani Muslim family in this whole town. And we most of the time when I was growing up, I was like the only brown kid in the whole class. And as you can imagine, this was the 60s and the 70s. The racism was blatant. In fact, nowadays, with all the stuff that's coming up with Trump, this is like deja vu for me. The kids in my class, they didn't know much about brown people. They used to tell me and my friends, well, we're white because we're clean, and you're brown because you're dirty. You know, brown is the color of dirt. You just have a lot of dirt in you. And they said, if you go home and take a lot of baths, you'll get white like us. Me and my sisters, we would have done anything to be like everybody else. And that meant being white. So when they said that, if you go home and take a lot of baths, you'll get white like us, we said, really? We said, okay, let's try it. So we went home and we started taking 5 baths a day, scrubbing as hard as we could, trying to get the brown off. The brown wouldn't come off. After 2 weeks, we thought, this isn't working. The brown's not coming off, but we still wanted to get white. So we thought, okay, if we can't get the brown off, maybe we can get the white in. So we took baby powder and we rubbed it really hard, trying to get it to stick into our skin. Now, of course, that just washed right off. My cousin, he was in the same position. He wanted to get white too. So what he did was he actually licked a spot on his arm and he started to rub. He licked and he rubbed and he licked and he rubbed till he got to the pink layer underneath, and it was all scabby around the edges. I said, what happened to your arm? It looks infected. He said, no, see, I'm getting white. And I thought, well, I'm not going to try that. That looks painful. But the last thing that me and my sisters did to try to get white, we were desperate. So what we did was we actually stopped drinking chocolate milk for a while. We thought if we eat white things, we're going to get white. Now, of course, I'm still brown. Nothing worked. My story is the story of how I came to terms with being a brown Canadian, a brown person in North America. It was not easy. And we have to come to terms with our differences. We have to become okay with who and what we are. That journey is the journey that people struggle with. Back then, the bullying also was like every day after school, we had a different bully waiting to beat us up. And when we told my dad, I told my dad, I said, Daddy, they're beating us up. And he said, just ignore them. Because the fact was, even at his workplace, my father was was being racially attacked. They didn't have the term Paki back then. This was before the term Paki came around. So they used to call my father Black Bastard. And my father was working $2.35 an hour. He would often work 16 hours a day because then he would get time and a half. He would get overtime. He worked as much as he could to try to put food on our table. And at his workplace, they didn't call him by his name. They didn't say, oh, Anwar, go do this. Anwar, go do that. They used to call him Black Bastard. And he put up with it because he had a wife and 4 children that were counting on him. But I think that put him in a very bad mood. He had a trigger anger. Like his anger, he would blow up at the smallest thing. And he was a typical Pakistani father. We did something, we made some mischief, oh, we would get it. But he turned out to be one of the biggest role models in my life. Many of us, we look at all of this kind of hardship and this difficulty, and we think of it in terms of negativity, and we think of ourselves as victims. The story I want to share is how I looked at that and I drew strength from it. Thank you for listening and watching.